In agri-climatology and expert in energy. Thank you so much, Koimbori, for making time for us on Bottomline Africa.
Thank you.
Great. Let's begin with the climate change, the degradation of the icebergs and, all these mountainous features that we saw earlier on before we took that break. What is causing all this?
Thank you so much for that question, George. And let me first of all start by saying that the problems of climate change are usually local, but the effects are global. And this we have categorically seen from the glaciers from our own place that is in East Africa. When we talk about Mount Kenya, we are talking about Ruwenzori, we're also talking about Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. All these glaciers within these mountains have been estimated to become extinct by 2030. Also, when you look at the global perspective in terms of the glaciers that we are seeing, is that they are melting at a higher rate, and also we have seen the permafrost, which is one of the ice that has been frozen within the soil, is also melting. What are some of the impacts of all this ice that is melting? The impacts are that, one, we are going to have what we call the increasing levels within the oceans, that is a rise in water levels. And one of the other drastic effects will be the increase in greenhouse gases emissions. Here I'm talking about the impacts relating to the carbons. Remember, all this ice is storing carbon. So once it melts, it releases all this carbon. This translates to cutting down forest and forests of trees. It's like cutting down the whole of Amazon forest or the Congo forest. So when the ice melts in the glaciers, this translates to a lot of carbon being released into the atmosphere.
And indeed, now back to COP26, we did see the US is back to the agreement after having, reinstated under Joe Biden's presidency. And in that last week came the coal agreement. In a nutshell, what does this portend for those countries, for the superpower countries to begin with? So
something that I've seen as a backdrop in these COP26 treaties that is happening on 4th, that is on last week on 4th November, we are hoping that treaty that was being signed on the coal agreement, that all these top emitters globally would have signed that treaty. Here I'm talking about China, I'm talking about India, I'm talking about Australia. These are countries that have actually did not sign this coal treaty. And this is something that is very worrying to us, because we are hoping that these countries that are actually emitting most of these carbons, especially China. China is emitting almost 30% of the carbon emissions, and yet they are not on the table when it comes to signing of these coal treaties. And when it comes to Africa, we are seeing African countries, they are part and parcel of these African treaties, they are signing it, and I'm happy to see Egypt among the new countries that have joined the signatories of actually ending coal funding or only coal project within their nations. Here I'm talking about 77 countries have actually become signatories into this coal ending agreement. And out of these 77 countries, 28 of them have actually been new countries that have joined these treaties. So we are seeing new countries joining the treaties of ending coal, and this is a positive trend. But what you are saying is that we are hoping all these other countries, be it China, be it India, be it Australia, they will actually, even Russia, they will actually scale up the efforts of ending the coal. But what I'm saying also to add up on that point is that in this relation, I've seen that China and also Japan and even South Korea, they have geared up efforts of saying that they will not fund any coal project overseas. So this is also a positive effort to those three countries.
And, Kenyanjis, one would wonder, you're telling countries to stop coal, use to stop financing of coal, but it's something that has been used for decades. So what's the alternative you're giving them?
Yes, the alternative for coal use, first of all, let me give you some statistics for that. According to the Global Carbon Project, they have actually said that as of 2050, we only have 11 years from now to stop the use of carbon, or else we'll face what we call extreme temperatures. So the alternative to the use of carbon here, I'm talking about the use of solar, renewable energies. Here I'm talking about solar, I'm talking about wind, I'm talking about the LPG gas. These are some of the things that I'm talking about. Even biogas. These are some of the alternatives you can embrace to move or to shift away from coal-powered plants.
Is it achievable?
Yes, it is achievable as long as we have the efforts and we have the backings of these development banks. I'm talking about the African Development Bank, I'm talking about the East African Development Bank, and even international banks. I have also seen there is a monetary fund set aside in the Green Climate Fund, which is attuned to around $100 billion, which has been set aside for every year. But what I'm seeing is that these countries are not actually playing their role, because up to now, only $80 billion has been contributed into the kitty that is supposed to be filled by $100 billion. So yes, it is achievable as long as we have countries playing their part, and also the will and the drive is there.
And this, of course, comes a year after, here in Kenya, the judges of the High Court stopped the coal processing plant in Lamu from taking effect. Does this rubber stamp the efforts by activists to stop the, the initial, construction of that plant?
Yes, this is something that we have seen as a positive effort. In fact, China, which was funding that coal plant, has said that it will not fund any unabated coal project overseas. So this is something that activists globally, and even in Kenya, they actually pioneered for this, and they said we don't want any coal plant coming up in Kenya. Something also I need to reiterate on this is that I work for an organization or a company known as ED Advisory, and in this company we make sure that we give advices in terms of energy, renewable energy kind of answers. So this is the way we are looking for, because we have seen that foreign nations are at the table when it comes to decision makings on matters affecting Africa, but African nations themselves, they are not put on that table to make decisions that are affecting themselves, because remember, all these developed nations, they developed because of these coal-powered projects. But now they're telling African nations to stop the use of coal, and yet we have not even reached that level of becoming developed.
And so, this whole discussion, because there has been that talk that, these developed nations then need to pay countries, that is the countries in the African continent, for, because we are the least emitters of any carbon, even the coal. How then of a disparity is this moving forward?
Thank you so much for that. In fact, Africa statistically shows that we only contribute as little as 3% of the carbon emissions globally. So this one tells you that we're actually playing the big brothers. That is, I'm talking about the top 5 global emitters. The big brothers are expecting the little brothers, that is Kenya and the African nations, to play a huge role in cutting their carbon emissions. And yet they're the ones who are actually polluting. But in this money they have set aside, we are hoping that money will be channeled to African nations and mostly developing nations, because we are the ones who are feeling the impacts of climate change. So we are hoping that this money they will actually streamline this process of actually getting access to this money. We don't need a long process of accessing this money, because once they put a long process, then it makes it hard for us to access this amount of money to ensure that we climate-proof ourselves against the impacts of climate change.
And talking about climate change, today's main program, that is Monday on COP26, is focused on the loss and damage caused by the global warming and how countries can adapt to climate change. From an environmentalist perspective and an expert in this field, Akwembori, what are some of those pieces of advice that perhaps you would give to nations, beginning with developing nations such as Kenya, and the global perspective of developed nations?
Thank you so much for that question, George. For Kenya, first of all, let me talk about Kenya because it falls among the developing nations. First of all, I want to say kudos to Kenya, because first of all, they have embraced and they have taken up the role of submitting their nationally determined contributions. And apart from that, they have cascaded the nationally determined contributions up to the county level. So this comes up with what we call climate policies. But one thing that I want to say is that the president just recently declared drought as a national disaster in Kenya, which has affected almost 2.1 million people in Kenya. Just recently, we were affected by the rising water levels, that is the floods. So what I'm saying is that in terms of Kenya, we need to scale up our efforts in terms of sustainable land management practices, in terms of embracing the use of climate financing structures, and also embracing renewable energies. These are ways we can follow. Globally, the nations can advise them to do is that they should cut their carbon emissions, because they're the ones who are contributing the most compared to us who are developed. And also, they should fund projects in developing nations that are geared towards a green kind of revolution. And also lastly, let me just mention is that those who are in the construction industry, I'm saying that they should embrace the green building initiative. This calls for the use of green initiative and green spaces in their building infrastructures, because this can help in cutting our carbon emissions. This can help to reduce our urban heat island effect. The problem we have seen in Nairobi, people are now feeling the heat extremely high. This is the problem you are seeing. As long as the building, the architects who are building these structures in Nairobi can embrace the green building initiative, then we cannot be feeling these impacts of heat, urban heat island effect that is making everybody in Nairobi feel hot and hotter every day.
And Koimburi, as we bring this conversation to a close, the home stretch, talking about policy and behavioral change means that policies have to be put in place. And I'm talking about the climate bill that should be introduced to the counties to make the counties access the climate fund. There is something towards that discussion that you could talk to us about, because it's something, because we may say so much about climate change, but clearly and needfully so, money is involved. So then how do countries shape up themselves, especially here in Kenya with the county assemblies, in aligning themselves with that fund?
Yes, thank you for that. Let me just say, out of the 47 counties we have in Kenya, only a handful of these counties have passed their climate change bill. Nakuru County has passed its climate change bill recently. Makueni has done that. So out of these counties that we have, the 47 of them, we only have a handful of them. That is around even 10 of them that have passed the climate change fund bill. And that one tells you now they have access to the climate change fund, which gives them access to the green climate fund, which is about $100 billion that is there for us to access. So let me say that they need to pull up their socks. For them to climate-proof the infrastructures, they need to make sure they have passed these bills. They need to make sure they have the climate change fund active for them to access this money. If not, they will continue lamenting for lack of access to money, and they will continue feeling the pinch of the climate change effects.
Indeed, of course, now the counties have had it. I hope that they need to pull up their socks and pass that climate change bill. I have been speaking to Kinyanjui Koimburi, PhD scholar in agroclimatology and also an expert in energy. Thank you so much, Koimburi, for joining us on Bottomline Africa.
Thank you so much.
Great. Now, our throwback clip for today dates back to 1999